Look at that. It's the whole internet out there.
She's quick.
Hey, all you internets. Hey, everyone.
Hello.
You guys reach your
Oh,
Whoa,
boy.
sorry.
No, God, you
There we
got
go.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Sorry, I get the podcasts confused sometimes.
We haven't even figured out when we're going to record last week's podcast.
You know,
Yeah,
nobody knows.
Sorry, that's a
Happens.
side note.
Just do it right after this.
Yeah.
Roll straight into it.
Yeah.
We'll hang out. We'll just watch.
Oh, mine. That would be a big day. That would be a big day for Jeff. It's been a big day for Jeff.
I'll let you guys watch us record any day.
I mean, I'm down for it.
Yeah.
So behind the curtain there, DC books are now coming into the store on like Friday instead of Wednesday. So like I have read some of next week's DC books before I had read most of last week's regular comic. But I'm going to have to like actually put a concerted effort into how I chunk things out into my brain now so that there's a okay workflow.
I thought I saw Django hold up Strange Adventures there.
Yeah. I read Strange Adventures on Friday or Saturday. It's been pretty wild.
The world's broken. Yeah. The world's broken. Hi, Nathan.
Does anyone know how to use AirPods?
Yeah, you put them in your ears.
You just stuff them
all
and
you're
go,
supposed
right?
to do?
Yeah.
Are you? I don't. Do they do Bluetooth? Are they a Bluetooth?
Sometimes you just hold the thing up to your phone and then they just connect.
Oh, I don't have her iPhone with me. This is Teresa's computer and AirPods.
So
It
just
explains your name.
Are you using a Mac or are you using a?
Yeah, MacBook.
Go up to the into the bar up on the top. There's a Bluetooth one, and then just hit that and hit the Bluetooth button, and then connect AirPods.
Wait,
Welcome to our tech support blog.
Yeah.
Don't forget to like, comment, and
Up on the
subscribe.
top.
I'm having flashbacks. I'm going back
Where the
into
time
the work
is.
week.
No, Win, don't go.
Okay.
Win, you have a stuffed
figure it out.
lockjaw.
I do.
That is the best thing I've seen today, and I've been all over
It's like
this.
the only good thing to come out of the Doomed Inhuman series is that Funko did a
Oh,
lockjaw.
is that how that? Okay, nice, nice, loving it. Hey, Nathan, how's your how?
I don't know why I'm my
You doing good?
That's funny.
What was that?
I was saying I don't know why I signed in as my work. I don't think I bet Sustainable Connections would endorse this book club, but I'm not here officially.
On behalf of Sustainable Connections.
Yeah.
You'll have to address every statement you make as on behalf of Sustainable Connections.
Yeah. Exactly.
On behalf of Sustainable Connections, what did you think of Volume 2?
Well, as long as
It was
Nathan, your
spooky.
headphones going.
Speaking of sustainable connections.
Will slide into my DMs here. So
Yeah, I got it.
he'll help.
All right. Well, while Will and Teresa or Nathan or whoever it is down there figures out what's going on, let's talk about this comic.
Gideon Falls Volume 2, everyone. Hey, Django, you weren't here for Volume 1. Do you want to just spend some time cataloging your feelings on that? Because Gideon Falls #1, I loved our book club about all that because I think myself included, but a couple of us kind of got it throughout the conversation of just sort of like the dual reality and shared connection space. That was a really I walked into work the next day. I was like, Justin, you remember when we read Gideon Falls when it was coming out? And he's like, yeah, it was fine. I was like, we didn't get it. Like, we didn't get it. And he was like, I think we got it. And I was like, no. Like, we never talked about any of these awesome things that are happening throughout it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed rereading #1 because I read it. I was going to be on the show and then I just wasn't. And the rereading it, I caught a lot of foreshadowing that I hadn't noticed the first time around, and things like I didn't even really reading it issue by issue. I never even really put it together that Gideon Falls is Gideon Falls is Gideon Falls is Gideon Falls. So like the two
Gideon
cities
Falls.
are the same, or like the city and the town are both the same place. And I was just kind of along for the sort of acid trippy ride, and I really liked kind of picking it apart and seeing the internal logic for the story from the very beginning. Because at some point, and I'm current with the ongoing issues, at some point it felt like this whole series took a real hard left turn, and I don't think it did. I think he's been telling us all this stuff all along. So
that was just the point where they pulled back the curtain, as it were.
Yeah. So, I'm really pleased that this book is even better than I thought it was, because I've been a huge fan of it kind of since the start, and I was reading it apparently with only one eye. So,
well, I was incredibly impressed, as always, with Mike's ability to figure out the twist in the second volume during the first volume, because I had no idea when I read it, and Mike was like, "Oh yeah, this is obvious."
Wait, what was the twist of the second volume?
The dual the multiverse, essentially, the dual universes.
Yeah.
Mike was like, "Oh yeah, there's two universes here," like nonchalantly, like no big deal. And I did not really pick that up. I felt like they were still people living in the same town. Like, I don't know, it just, something didn't feel right, but it hadn't really clicked until reading volume 2, and then Mike just shamed me completely last time by completely seeing the writing on the wall very early.
Literally, the red writing on the wall.
The red writing and random circles and sketches of barns, and
yeah, it said Zur and R on there, right?
Django, different podcast.
Oh gosh,
I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, it's hard. There's too many podcasts in the head now. It's juggling all around. To that point, Will, the dual nature, and then in this particular volume, when we get it's not just dual cities. So we got future Actually, there was a lot of flying cars in that one shot of all of the infinite parallel realities. I was like, love this art. Leaning on the hovering car in these ones. A lot of zoom shots, but.
Did you guys guess that the Norton might be her brother early on?
I kind of like, that's where I thought this whole thing was going from volume 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
I was glad they didn't draw that out too much, because it felt a little obvious. So they immediately went to like, yeah, it is her brother.
Yeah.
Good call, honestly.
Like, especially with like the end shot of volume 1 being establishing, oh yeah, the city is also Gideon Falls.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I'm in the same pool as Emily. Like, if they tried to drag that out past the second volume, I probably would have been like, are we still, is this like a Lost being in purgatory sort of situation?
We were
like,
just
everybody
talking
guessed
about
it and they're now
Lost.
trying to like hide it.
Before we got into this chat, we were talking about Lost. But that speaks to the feeling I kept having during reading this particular volume, is that I think that this book is really well paced.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you move quickly through it, and there's a lot of ideas tossed at you. And like halfway through it, I was like, I know that this volume is going to end with Norton and the priest being put into each other's, realities. That one was like, kind of knew that was where it was going, especially because of the Mobius strip, which, Django, I can't believe that you like a book that has an active Mobius strip.
No, that's a DNA strand. It's got to be.
Okay. Mobius guy hates a Mobius strip. But yeah, I really enjoyed the pacing of it. Like, every time you kind of get an idea of like, are they going to do this? You kind of get to see whether or not that's paid off relatively quickly, which it can be kind of discouraging when you're like predicting a point and then it takes 10 issues to get to it, and then it reaffirms that thing that you were predicting. Mm-hmm. So I think that like he feeds things in a way that get resolution really paced very, very well. And you cook through the whole thing.
This is my third time reading both volumes 1 and 2, which is the only trade on my shelf so far that I can say that about. And nice. That is a high honor. I mean, it's so amazing. The art, you can't stop looking at, and every time you look at it, you notice more. Like even like the scene Jeff was talking about with all the parallel realities, just the explosion. You could spend an hour on that page and probably not even see everything. Like, it's just, for people, everyone else, there's so much.
So I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but there's a cover with these dots right? And that's kind of like that's what's inside the black barn.
Yeah.
Are we seeing just the power nodes of the machine that's in there?
That was kind of my take.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so.
It
I like
seems
that
like
a lot.
the David Bowie's portrayal of Tesla from The Prestige is what that barn sequence always reminds me of.
And I actually had a question. Is that because they do make the cover smaller in those little intro sections? Was the original cover more like the thing in the back where it's like this much larger and you can actually see the texture of the black barn in the circles? Because I didn't notice that until this read, looking through the art in the back.
I
Django, you
wasn't
probably
getting
got
it
the
in
issues.
singles, so I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm kind of surprised that is actually the cover to that issue because the rest of this volume has
Usually
a very
they're
specific.
faces.
Yeah, it's this volume and the previous volume were all faces, right? So to have that be one of them, I don't see a face in there.
Could have been an alt cover because usually it's alt covers in the back of a trade.
So that's issue 11.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that was the A cover. I definitely remember having that issue in the store. And I could even make a justification as to why that breaks the motif, because no longer are we sort of like in that issue we swapped realities. It kind of everything came together character wise and personality wise through that device. So like, it had also a strong Twin Peaks vibe to me, which I really, really liked.
I
don't remember if we definitely talked about how like the letterer is credited also as the designer for this book, and we proffered that maybe a lot of the graphic design stuff is also Steve Wands, who is the letterer. But the lettering in this is phenomenal. It's not like the vast majority of lettering that you read. Like it has a sort of handwritten all caps feel to it, less like printed word that is super homogenized. Like just the text throughout all of it, it's just one of those weird things that I'll notice while reading a comic. Like, why is it taking me a long time to get through whatever book? And sometimes it can just be that the font is like really difficult to grapple with, and I just found it like really pleasing on this one.
And all of the word balloons are a little bit bad. Like there's artifacts throughout all of them. There's just something a little bit goofy about every one of the word balloons, and even like down to the stick that comes off the word balloon is non-standard.
Yeah, like they all look like there's like I don't remember what they're called, but they were like you like scratch off the top coat to make a picture.
Oh yeah.
Like the top coat was black and then underneath would be like rainbow or something. Yeah. They're called something. I just don't remember what they're called. But it almost looks like they're like scraped out of the image.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
Like
I think
the edges have kind of a similar texture to like, the way that, all the black is not like pure black. It's textured black.
Right. Mike, what were you to say?
Yeah, it's one of those because I consider like word balloons and stuff definitely part of the lettering. It's all but it's the balloons mixed with the lettering choice makes it feel more real. It's one of these weird instincts you kind of develop from reading comics is the kind of subtle language of lettering and the format. And I almost read this as it almost helps you hear the voices for me, because you can look at the missing, almost a crackle to the balloon to represent like how much imperfection there is in people's voice, which is normal and real.
Yeah, it's almost like reading through a radio broadcast to me.
Right, and there are some balloons where it's less. There's less of it than there are in other ones, and maybe in those balloons, the voice is a bit clearer. There's a little bit less of the fry or the strain in the voice. That's almost how I I read it like I'm looking at a random page, and there are ones where there's big black chunks missing out of the blue. Then other ones where it's pristine.
I'm curious. So like throughout both of these volumes that we've read, there is like through particularly the coloring and the shadows, there's like a prevalent texture. Andrew just mentioned it on like in the cover of those balloons there, or the balls of the electronic thing. I'm curious, what do you all think whoever is doing that thinks? I don't know if that's Dave Stewart on colors, or if that's a Sorrentino effect intentionally, or if it's actually like the designer at the end. But I'm curious, what is everyone else's read on what their perceived intentionality with that is, right? Like it's probably not just like, oh, here's a cool Photoshop filter I'm tossing on here. I would have to imagine there's maybe like some metaphorical or highly stylistic thing that maybe it registers in their brain as they're doing it. Does anybody have any ideas of what it maybe could mean to them?
It looks like wood grain to me.
Yeah, it's the Black Barn. That's,
right.
It's the stories about the Black Barn, and it just feels like these are wood etchings on the, like that's the vibe I get, is like a wood etching vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some pages that don't have it, and I just flipping through, I don't really have a great theory about how they decided when to use it, when not. But actually, in that multiverse page,
it's kind of just the multiverse, and they did the same thing in the first volume.
When they're in the barn.
Yeah.
And then this part stylized in a different way, but it doesn't have it.
Didn't somebody say, maybe it was Win, about like somebody, I feel like somebody said something about like, when you make a copy of a copy and kind of loses quality and texture, and something about that idea that ties to the multiverse and, a bunch of copies of the same town or same universe, or,
like
maybe something in there with that.
That would also make a lot of sense.
Can I point out a good place where it is completely absent?
Yeah.
Yes,
the flashback to the school bus in the first issue of this volume.
The one full of halftone dots.
30
it's full of halftone dots, yeah.
72 panels on those 2 pages.
Yeah,
which I loved.
My personal theory is that it seems like everything that has the shadows means that it's under the influence or the creation of the Black Barn in some way. I think I've first noticed it on my third read through, but Rhett pointed it out when we did volume 1. And this is the scene from volume 1. It's like page 8 or something. How it's literally a page rip, and then you just get pure red Black Barn. And this volume opens up in this same exact way. And so I think that's very interesting how it rips us into the dark redness of the Black Barn. And it makes me feel that everything that is like in the last issue of the volume 1 and the last issue of this, where they're actually inside the Black Barn and kind of seeing behind the curtain, that's when we get the textures taken away, because there's no sort of deception or the layering on copies and copies on copies. It's actually truth in its pure form.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that it's that texture behind the ripped page, and then you go to the next page and it's just that same texture on the next page too.
Welcome to Gideon Falls.
So besides like texture as a through line, someone brought up the neckbeard last time, and I actually got really obsessed with like neckbeard trutherism or something, because he has an inconsistent beard. It's there sometimes than not, and it's not. I don't think it could be explained by shaving, because this all takes place in like a day. Does it mean anything, or is it just like a problem with the art?
I still feel like it's just a weird way of doing shadows under the chin.
That weird between the worlds neckbeard.
But there are some times where he very clearly
hairs.
has a neckbeard.
He has like a really strong amount of stubble down here.
Yeah.
And then the real Norton Sinclair has the weird little beard. And then there was something with the guy he met in the hallway, and
yeah, in the first volume.
I don't know. Yeah,
like, right here.
It might boil down to like a stylistic thing that it's just.
I was wondering if it showed timeline somehow. Oh, see that?
That's interesting. Oh, and that idea is really cool too, showing timeline. That stuff didn't crop into me while reading this volume, but now I feel like I missed a whole fun neckbeard adventure.
Does somebody have? Does somebody here have Twitter and they can just ask Andrea Sorrentino or Jeff Lemire?
I mean, I'm willing to tweet at them.
Yeah, see, maybe they can tell us before we're done here.
I don't know their reaction speed, but we'll see what happens.
I don't want to ruin your social media clout win, but
oh, trust me, that's already been long ruined.
I thought, like, while reading this volume, I drew a parallel between the therapist doctor and the priest, both as people who you could see as acting outside of the bounds of what their profession deems respectable, and both sort of dealing with trying to follow a sort of moral or life path after having sort of fallen out of the graces and living outside of that path with which they were living. And I kept trying to draw like more comparisons of like an idea of like, do they fill a sort of metaphorical equivalent within both realities? And then that was kind of thrown out the window when he is then taken to the other reality. But I don't know, I like as disgraced practicers of, you know, a goal or some way, I don't know. They both really had that on full display in these two volumes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they also kind of play different sides of skepticism on both ends of, you know, a religious and then maybe more a science-based one, albeit they both are, you know, strayed from those ideals, but they're kind of polar opposite sides of those two things.
And how about like last time we were like, yeah, she really is not following the rules of a good practicing therapist. And then when the bad dude shows up and takes him and he's like, you are not, you know, you are out of your line. And I'm like, whoa, dude, you back up. She's trying to help him. And like how quickly I was on the other side of like, well, you don't know. Yeah, I laughed at myself there.
I mean, they're both also our Luke Skywalkers.
School's handler.
Like, yeah. Well, I think once we get later in the volume and we see the, you know, the literal parallelism happening, which, you know, parallelism is a big theme and a big visual element simultaneously in especially this volume, but in Gideon Falls in general. We're seeing the parallel between the therapist and the police officer.
Right.
They seem to have similar roles.
Right.
And I think I could see a similar conflict with them as well, between wanting to find the truth but also adhering to their duty, but also caring about the people close to them.
Dana Scully.
Right.
Well, they're both Scullys.
I was just looking at it again. Does Dr. Kadri look like what's his name? Willard, the priest, the father?
He does kind of.
Because we're talking about these timeline things, and I'm starting to think, like, is this possibly like some weird time loop or is it just an artistic?
I mean, I feel like, you know, in like like the previous priest's death was like why he came to Gideon Falls, and then like it wouldn't shock me, like, you know, to reuse him for that face for something else.
I was seeing the priest's face everywhere.
Yeah. Part of that. If the bishop's part of, like, maybe if the bishop is the priest, or no.
The bishop definitely says some ominous things there.
It's possible.
He says, like, come and find me when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then
it's
is
just the
the
same
bishop?
actor, guys.
Yeah. Is the bishop
Having you seen
in
Hamilton? You're allowed to use people in 2 different acts.
Like, I was fun. Even the guy in the coffee shop where the orphanage used to be has exactly the same face shape, that same sort of big chin, jaw.
Right, and this guy, when she goes into the wrong room in the institution, Like that dude
there
looks a lot like the plowman guy with the beard, but also like it's down to the same glasses. I guess to Mike's point, I was seeing other people's faces all over this particular volume. Like, and I don't know if that is a possible shortcoming of the artist, or if it is, you know, there's this huge story component of like things existing in multiple places and multiple times, of people having more than one role. So yeah, it's an interesting facet of the story at this point to not know if it's just a stylistic thing or a story component.
So you go to the Nick Dragotta School of Art or not?
same thing. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the further we get into it, they just start running out of
faces.
So on the subject of time, when Norton is seeing this guy, it doesn't seem like it transitions as a flashback, but it goes from him as a kid to him grown up in here. Did you guys perceive that as like a flashback and this happening at the same time, or more like a, I don't know, like a Dr. Manhattan type situation where this was happening at the same time in both realities? I don't know. I kind of read it that way, but I'm curious if it was just me.
It felt like it's deliberately blurred, but he is remembering this due to the circumstances that he's in. The flashback is happening in real time. He is, again, it's not a hallucination, or it could be a hallucination seeing the figure there in the shadows, but it's at the very least the same conditions of being, you know, scared in the corner of this dark place during this dark time, afraid, and this figure comes to him in the shadows, which I loved the size of the absence of a panel at the bottom there, just this face in the distance in the darkness. Yeah. Has anyone here had sleep paralysis before?
Oh,
yeah.
It had really strong sleep paralysis vibes.
Yeah, I wonder why is that so scary also?
It definitely seems like the kind of thing that, like, you know, if I made the mistake and opened my eyes while sleep paralysis was happening, this is what I would see.
So back to the doctor, it looks like at least Norton thinks that the doctor is the bad guy, right? The smiling man.
It certainly felt like maybe even more than a possible delusion. Like it seemed like there was lots of, you know, like that dude has a nefarious intention.
I think, my default position until you can really nail down what this entity is that it can be any of these people. And yeah, it just has lots of potential of just inserting itself into reality where it wishes.
Any reality.
It also begs the question, I mean, how many citizens from each iteration are there multiple copies? Because I would imagine if you're a weird demon controlling multiple realities, you might have multiple copies of the same person running around. I don't know.
Very strong Twin Peak vibes.
Because what we ultimately discover is that this is an entity that exists outside of reality and between them.
But between them is sort of the big thing. And Andrew, or actually Will, to your point earlier, like the memory component of being in the place where they found the key. I mean, this whole volume had significant times over and over again where someone was in the present and they were experiencing something from the past, like to when they found the keys, or you know, or the box that was hidden with the picture of Norton. So I almost interpreted it that way, as like for some reason we're picking up ripples or waves from different times propagating and sort of bouncing back on this moment.
Question?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm also reading Something is Killing the Children, the Jimmy TIV thing, and they've got the monsters, and I'm not remembering what's the catalyst for being able to see the demon, because in volume 1 I know we talked, Norton was talking to Angie. What is it?
Are you talking about this, or are you talking about Something is Killing the Children?
Well, this, but now I don't think I can remember either one exactly, but in this one I can just remember the conversation that Norton had, fake Norton had with
okay.
Dr. Zoo. Me too.
Well, and that
we're not
is
saving
just
them very well
being a
by
kid, I
perpetuating
think.
all these stories. Yeah, but one of the okay,
Yeah,
sure. But
then
in this one,
the other
when,
guy
when
got
we talk
shot,
to
and yeah.
I think
so
he
Dr.
chooses
Zoo,
this. I think the entity chooses like who can see him
But-
and who cannot.
do you remember when Norton was talking to Dr. Zoo in like the second issue? Doc, that's not right. Angie in the second issue, and was saying like, "No, I don't want you to tell you about it because then you'll see it." And he kind of mentioned it, and then that's when she like turned around on the street and saw the black barn.
That's
So
a
why
common,
can
yeah.
they see it?
This is a common component of like surrealist horror and like Lovecraftian horror. The idea that it's knowing about something that exposes you to danger of it.
When you see
Anxiety.
it, it sees you.
Mhm.
Right. It's looking into the abyss and the abyss staring back. But yeah, the uncanniness being a core component of surrealist horror, of knowing about something shouldn't mean that thing then knows about you in return. But that's a terrifying concept.
Well, and just
It's
ask
more terrifying because it shouldn't work like that.
just
And
ask
its
Bugs
mind's
Bunny.
much bigger.
When you look down, you fall. This
Right.
is
It's
all
that
just a
kind
Looney
of
Tunes
dream
allegory.
logic. Yeah.
Everything goes back to Looney Tunes.
Yeah, with Django and Justin.
So there are a couple things that I thought were uncanny about the coffee shop that they went to. One, they called out directly in the story where he orders a super fancy coffee with extra whip, just kind of nonchalantly. And I thought that was an interesting little bit of character building. But then they serve him a hot coffee with
A lid on it.
a straw,
With the straw.
Yeah.
I was going to
with a crazy straw.
Yeah, or is it a straw that he has bent into that pattern? When I noticed that, I started like going through the book looking for that pattern somewhere else. It's that kind of comic.
Well, because
I never noticed that.
It's a red straw, and we keep seeing red highlights on things.
I interpreted it as like the affectation to order the whipped cream is a sort of naive or childlike affectation of his, and then they gave him incorrectly like a mochaccino was probably like a frappuccino, which is a blended ice drink, and then whipped cream on top. But they didn't actually draw. I worked at Starbucks. I know Nathan's done his time in the coffee. But and then I thought that maybe they used the straw as sort of like it's a child's straw as a way of sort of pushing that affectation. But I wish I had interpreted it as Mike's then going through the book looking for that squiggle of a line, because it is that type of book, and I did it multiple times go through the entire book looking for a pattern. So
it's just a joke that he couldn't drink it with his mask on.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's a more practical consideration.
Yeah.
I mean, in the age of Corona.
No, so glad to
because
see his
again, we
mask
keep-
on.
Yeah, we keep ignoring that he's wearing a mask, and that's supposed to be weird because
Yeah. Like the other day we were going into the Everett Mall and my sister was going to bring her Starbucks in, and I'm like, why? You can't drink it. You have to wear your mask the whole time.
What do you got
Jeff,
there, Django?
when the pandemic is over, we're going to get our logo printed on garbage bags that we just throw away.
Yeah, I was also like this. So this coffee place just throws bags of garbage into the basement. Is that like
Who does that?
And what
Nathan,
is this,
you
the
managed
old
to spot?
And maybe it's coffee grounds they keep for people to come grab.
Okay.
That could be
Compost.
There's a thematic
And on the
element
term
for
of
that
his
as well, though.
The rot beneath everything.
Well, garbage bags specifically.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
When that's where he's finding all of this stuff. It's where he finds the door. It's where he's finding this key.
First page.
Yeah, in the first page, he's on a bunch of garbage bags, and then when we get the split page of them, yeah, all garbage bags down there.
Yeah, because they're both in the dump.
Right.
Yeah, they went to the dump
Dirty.
in the town and the city of Gideon Falls. Huh.
I in the scene, the double page scene where they're both horizontal and they're both like standing in the garbage right before that. Like I was sitting on a porch reading it and I had it like sideways and Sam was reading next to me and then I had the other side and then I was just like, I love any comic that has me like flipping a book around to read it. It's just,
Yeah,
Work those traps.
yeah.
It always gives me Alan Moore's Promethea vibes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Mobius strips in that as well.
Or
Double helix.
the book of the House of Leaves does that, the novel.
Oh my gosh.
Don't read that right when we move into a new house. It's like
No, don't read it in the dark.
Yeah.
Don't read it in a new house.
You read
Andrew,
it
you're
in broad
muted.
daylight in your backyard.
Smile.
How
a
about
nice,
reading?
comforting
How about reading
beverage.
this in the dark?
That was the scariest part of this volume, and it just is like that whole scene of opening the mouth and then the slow opening of the other out, crunching out the back, and just all of that was the origin of the creepy red smile. Just it makes it all so much worse for me. And I love it.
Wow, I didn't associate the like giant gaping huge smile with the dude whose mouth tore open because of bugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's holding. He's peeling his mouth open right there for the smile.
Yeah, bum deal.
That's him.
The worst, grossest, but best drawn thing.
I just got real caught up with the bugs.
Oh, and then the fact that is Norton Sinclair who's becoming the gateway for this entity, and the younger
his own little
Norton
Kafka
Sinclair.
moment.
But then adding into that, you know, kind of our Norton Sinclair having the mask on all the time, being super protective of his mouth.
Ain't nobody making him smile.
So do we know why he got the name Norton Sinclair? I can't remember.
I think it's what he says his name is at the start when he
Yeah. When he comes
Like-
out, it's the only thing that he can remember because he was assumably in the barn and was talking to Norton Sinclair, and so that's the only name that was in his head. So coming out of it, just like when the priest comes out on the other side, and he doesn't know who he is at all, at least until volume 3.
I think the fact that we have it on that torn panel with the barn peeking through from the other side is significant. That the barn wants him to be Norton Sinclair in that moment.
Maybe Norton's body is just getting too old or something, and that's why he needs the new doorway.
So he needs like a new vessel to latch on the portal.
Or the whole thing is a temporal loop.
Yeah.
I did really like, speaking to just what we were saying earlier, I liked that when they were in the barn, he's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm Norton Sinclair." And they were just immediately like, "No, you're not. I am." I was like, cool. I didn't want several issues of like, "Oh, you're not my son. You're not my, you are my son." Like I'm glad, like, please give me that. Yeah.
And
Is
can
there
we
a
talk
chance
about
that they're the same person though? Potentially.
That's a good question.
Django, please go first.
Oh, I just really like this. If you look at it from far enough away, it's like one of those mosaics. This little picture is making a bigger picture.
Yeah, that's even. I mean, the layers of all the realities forming a bigger picture. Man,
yes, the same. Yeah.
I was just going to point out, I love the deconstruction of them falling into the panel and becoming smaller panels.
Yeah.
And then spending an entire double page of them just like you can sit in that and then just letting that space breathe. I really just appreciate it. Just sitting in that and being like, just feeling it. Ugh. Yeah. Which is ironically what he says when he gets out.
One of the things that I read a lot of horror and I like a lot of gross, like sort of gruesome comics. And one of the things that grosses me out the most is when you can look at somebody and feel like their skin is coming up, like it's been flayed off their bones. And this first panel on the Norton origin story, like that head, that's something I never want to happen to my head or any other part of my skin. I really like that kind of serial killer origin that he put in there. It scratched a different itch than the rest of this comic has.
I totally agree. I really can't speak to how well I do think this series flows. Like, it just made me really excited to read the next volume. It just immediately. But yeah,
I had the same feeling that you were saying, Django, but about this, just all the dismemberment happening.
Oh yeah.
In the following panels, just like the sheer horror of, I put myself like sometimes in like, you know, a spectator position, so the people that are seeing this or witnessing this happen, of just these people just basically disintegrating. That was like some sheer horror for me.
Yeah, you can see that guy on the left white background panel. You can just hear him saying something that he said earlier in the movie over and over and over because his brain is so broken. Oh, I don't like beans. Oh, I don't like beans.
I don't like beans.
I don't like beans.
I don't like beans.
Yeah.
Told my mom I didn't like beans. Django, does this book, like, you've said it, like it becomes a science fiction book at some point, and I don't want spoilers or anything, but it is the horror element, like, is it lessened from here on out? Is it science fiction horror? Does it become, like, I'm curious, and I'm just excited to read it because it, like I said, it flows so well. But I loved, like you said, the serial killer origin there. It was just like a different type of story that then segued perfectly into this one. I liked that reprieve.
I think it's a really good kind of zippering of that, but it definitely in volume 1, it's presented as just a horror story.
Yeah.
A zippering, you say?
Oh.
And then, you know, this one, we get just a touch of sci-fi with the multiverse and the machine. And I really don't know where it's going to go from where it is now, but it feels almost like it's sort of a seesaw where he's like, okay, here's the horror, here's some sci-fi, back to the horror.
If everyone's okay with it, I would like to show page 3 from the first issue in volume 3, because the horror it stays.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. It is just as prevalent. It takes it and it's like, yes, and it just adds a whole new layer, and it's unbelievable.
Okay.
It just, the way that he broadens the story, and like Django has said, adds the sci-fi element while not removing any other elements, it's brilliant.
The volume 4, for anybody who has it,
I was going to bring this up,
is missing the word balloons for an entire issue, and you will get a replacement from us.
I was going to say, if you
about
like the silent issue in East of West volume 3 or 4, there's another great silent issue in Gideon Falls volume 4.
But it doesn't quite make as much sense.
Thing.
Photoshop layers, man.
I remember seeing that image email go out.
Yeah.
You guys know I take pictures of panels if I want to talk about them, and I have one from this, and it's in that category of how reading comics during quarantine, reading comics during Black Lives Matter. There's all the things going on in the world right now. So many comics that are all along intending to say something are megaphoned right now. And it was, I don't even remember where this was. I read this. I've read 60 issues of comics since I read this volume, but it's the preacher when he says, do we turn inwards? Do we keep to ourselves, or do we turn to one another? Do we become strangers and let fear and mistrust destroy us, or do we become a community? Not particularly profound, but just a really fun thing to read when the whole world is saying something similar to that. And it's just cool what really any artistic medium does, but comics are basically all I read, and it's just fun when it connects like that, you know.
He's just quoting Pink Floyd there.
I love it.
Is that in the scene that, like, immediately, one thing I would love clarification on from everybody, did he, like, actually pass out during a sermon? Because it seemed,
this is what it
I wondered
to have been reported to him after the fact. But yeah, it definitely looked like an unstuck in time moment.
Because
it's like a time warp or something.
Because the police officer, it feels like, says, like, I thought I'd come visit you because last night you seemed kind of weird, or like it seemed like we had two moments that immediately followed one another, but he also said, like, I don't know that anyone's going to come back to my church now, which is like, oh, it's okay. So did you actually just like pass out or disappear in the middle of a sermon, or what happened?
I think he no-showed.
Or maybe went into a catatonic state would be a good assumption.
Yeah. And that's what I assumed. I just would love more like a definitive
Didn't it go
answer
from like
for that.
didn't it go from like Sunday to Wednesday?
Yeah.
So I just don't understand how somebody could,
Yeah.
you know,
I think
pass
you're right,
out or
Will.
be in a catatonic state for like 3 days without being in the hospital or something like that. That's why it felt like it was a weird kind of just like a time warp or a jump in time. And maybe time did happen in between that, but he has no memory of it. Maybe he had the page ripped out of his memory there.
Yeah,
or
that's what I was
something.
thinking.
I took it as that he was giving the sermon to an
I like
empty
it in
room,
his
and
face.
she happens to walk in. But
Oh, I think you're right, because
I wondered that.
he
but
says, Father, it's Wednesday. There was no one here. And he's in there right now. Okay, there you go. Way to go, Emily.
Oh,
Cracking codes.
I have to just re-acknowledge what Will just said. The ripping pages out of memory, I think that might be super relevant to this because of those page rips early on.
Mm-hmm.
They're ripping pieces out of the memory. Man.
Maybe the smiling man ripped some pages out of your comic book.
Oh.
And that's why Volume
Django
1
is
was
the
in
smiling
bubbles.
man.
At some point, I want a comic to have gone to the actual production values of making a page appear to be
Torn
ripped
out.
out of every issue.
There was
Ed Piskor will do it.
Yeah, Ed Piskor will do it. There was a comic called The Protectors, I think, that had a bullet shot through each issue, but I think they actually just drilled a hole through them.
they put stickers on the back of their pickup truck to make it look like it.
Yeah.
Gasoline in the Bentley.
While reading this volume, I felt that it felt like a really good television treatment. And the first volume had, and within this, there's still so many aspects I think make it really unique to comic book, but just the way that people were interacting within it and the rate that it was moving reminded me really heavily of television. I guess I keep saying like Twin Peaks and some other things, but just
And
like
Lost,
like the dialogue heavy. I don't know. It was weird how much this one felt like it was maybe going to get optioned for a television show. Actually, didn't it get optioned for a television show?
I think I don't remember who with, but I remember seeing something saying that because I remember me and a coworker have been like reading this as it comes out.
Now that
Jeff Lemire, what hasn't?
Well, right, but I think that around issue 6, issue number 1 skyrocketed in price. Remember, Django? And I think it's because it had got optioned for a TV show at that point. At which point I don't know. There's just something about it in this one that felt, I don't know how to describe it. Like
the structure would fit well in a cliffhangery TV show.
Not even necessarily the cliffhangery nature of it, but just sort of, I don't know.
Pacing of transitioning from one reality to the next, maybe.
Yeah, and the way
expect that they would
were
illustrate
talking.
that cinematography wise. How would they make all of the surrealism and like? Well, I guess of course you don't have to have a blank background or whatever, or like seeing the smiling guy. You know, something like Stranger Things. It went so far. I know it's not totally horror, but it went so far on this idea that you didn't really see the monsters, and then once you did, it was like they're still scary, but like not quite as much. I wonder how that would work.
I think they would have to. Go ahead,
Mike.
Yeah, a good model for it would be the FX Hulu Legion series.
Mm-hmm.
It managed to do great surrealist visual stuff within visual media. Yeah.
It kind of has a similar problem to Watchmen if you adapt it. Like the Watchmen movie didn't necessarily work as well as the comic because part of the actual Watchmen comic is a commentary on comic books. And when you switch that over to a movie, you lose things like the Black Freighter and some of the comic book trickery that he was doing. And with this is pretty similar because, you know, they're playing with the medium quite a bit. So if they turned this into a TV show, I think you would have to change the way that people fall and turn into panels or fall out of panels, or like you wouldn't have the halftone dots to signify a specific flashback.
Yeah, I don't think I don't necessarily love that aspect. I really liked this volume, but it just felt like I didn't get that feeling from the first volume as much. In fact, there was many instances where it felt like it couldn't have been put on television. Where this one, it still had some of those moments, but just in the way that like every scene is sort of focused around a conversation, not tons of bits of silence. So it was like kind of cut. I don't know. If no one else felt that way, it was a weird
I would say
presence of television.
seeing as it was optioned in June 2018 by Hive Mind Productions, which I'm not really familiar with, and there's still nothing further than that I can find.
We're probably
It's,
safe.
in
probably going to be a while.
Brood Network.
In October of 2018, they added James Wan, who did
He did
Aquaman movie. Yeah.
Ooh.
I mean, he did a
Butt
really good
rock
Aquaman,
of-
but
This is October of 2019, so it seems like it was moving forward, and then
yeah, but
who knows what's going on now.
Most things are on hold at this point.
All right, so I have a something I thought that I was a little surprised that I thought that was a symptom of not reading. I read this book probably 5 days before we were going to have the last thing. I read it right when I got it immediately. Enjoyed it so much. Like when I'm in this, right? It's, yeah, seriously. I mean, looking at that page, you look at this page and it doesn't matter even the content of it. You're just enjoying it so much while you're inside of it. It is just like, it's that song that you turn on that you're just like, this is exactly what my entire being needed right now. You just look at Sorrentino, you look at Lemire's text, and it's so amazing. And then I went however many days since then, and I read a bunch. I've read a ton of like 2016 Ultimates, all new different Avengers, all new Wolverine, like stuff that's sometimes mediocre, but I was just kind of like getting through the whole like couple of years. And since then, this has had less lasting value than I thought it was going to. And I'm wondering if that will keep up, or if anybody else has even like remotely hinted as that. But when I look back at it, I open a page and I'm like, holy crap, Andrea Sorrentino is unbelievable. I want to like sit in this again. But when I'm not thinking about it, I don't care about the story all that much. It doesn't seem quite as compelling. Is that resonating with anyone, or am I kind of like
reading it issue by issue? That's definitely how I've felt. Like I go back to the next issue because I remember that I liked it, but I don't actively like it in between readings, I guess.
I couldn't remember. I mean, I could remember some of the main story beats, but rereading it the second time, like it was, I almost liked that a bit because I was getting to kind of relive it again and re-enjoy it, but remembering some of the bigger beats, so I knew some of the things that were coming, so I could look for more stuff. And then after I finished volume 2, I picked up volume 3 and flipped through it for a minute, and I know I read volume 3, but so much of what I flipped through, I couldn't remember any of it. Like it lost all familiarity with it. And I was about to start reading it. I was like, no, I'm gonna hold. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna read this when we get to it on book club and kind of enjoy it all over again. But I guess I can see that's what you're saying. A little bit of the I kind of forget a bit of it, but when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh my god, like this is one of my favorite things that I've read. I love this so much. I love every second of it. Like I don't.
And that's probably okay, right? Like it's a different style than something that has like the longest lasting value. If you just call lasting value like one attribute that it has, maybe it's going to be a little bit lower, but like the art's a 10 or whatever. I don't know.
Like Jeff said about like being able to reread Day Tripper every few years. I feel like it's kind of the same thing. Like because of that, I feel like I can pick this up. And so when this, whenever this finally wraps, I'm excited to be able to go back and reread the early volumes and see all the little things that were hidden. And because of the pacing that Jeff said, like it never feels like a slog when reading it. I don't ever feel stuck. I could just pick it up and I'm just excited to get through it and be in that world. So
and
I'm really excited about it.
Single issues is like that. Like I pick it up and I don't remember what's been going on, but I'm never lost. And the structure of the story and whatever he does to kind of catch you up for the important things in a specific issue works really well.
The ability to have that,
I'm also curious if
please, Emily,
I'm curious if in a week if you'll feel different if we end up discussing the third issue, because I always had that with East of West, like I couldn't hold a mind map of it, but then having these discussions like actually internalize the plot a little bit and could follow the threads. So you might feel different after discussing it.
For me, this is an interesting contrast with East of West, because with this, I don't always know what's happening, but I never feel completely lost. And I've definitely had that, a few times with East of West. I mean, really a lot more towards the beginning, but I've definitely had those moments where I just feel like I don't know where I am. I don't know what's happening at all right now. Versus this, I don't know what's happening, but I love it.
Yeah, and in
going.
this, the separation between like the art and the plot is so much narrower than with East of West. East of West, it's a story that makes linear sense. You could describe it in just words, and you get the same kind of value from the story.
And different artists could
artists could do it in different ways, and it would still
Probably
be the same story. The story, what you're experiencing of the story is so tied to the art.
Mm-hmm.
They're so interconnected. But what you're describing as well, I think, really sounds a lot like the whole idea that you can only experience something the first time once. So you're reading through it and you're getting blown away by all of the art, and at the same time you're experiencing the story. Then you have the story. You've digested it that first time. But then the art is so standalone, fantastic, and interesting that you go back and look over it in the same way that you would other comics where the art is just the art is more conventional and the story is more linear, and you're just going for a nice easy read of something that is familiar. You're chewing over a familiar story and visuals. But in this, you can't really do that. The visuals are too striking to have that sort of easy rumination. It's like watching an Indiana Jones movie again.
I think I resonate like with all the things that you guys have all just said here, and even back to that original statement, Nathan, of just while I was reading this, I could have, if I had volume 3 with me, I was like, I can continue on this vibe and just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm standing at the infinite craft service table of comic books at the end of time and I have to pick between Gideon Falls or East of West, I'm going to probably pick East of West in terms of like the caliber and the thing that resonates. But generally, when I finish a volume of that for book club, I'm like, okay, loved that. Glad I'm done with that for now. And I'll come back to the next one in like 2 weeks. It lives in my memory as a slightly maybe kind of higher caliber thing. However, I am excited to get off the train when the time comes, whereas this one, I could have stayed on the train for another like several volumes. And I don't know what it is about that, but some things, like you're saying, you find these truths or you hit these things, you're like, wow, it's amazing. And maybe they dim over time or something, but I don't know. The pacing is what it all kind of comes back to me. It's so easy and joyful and easy to be a part of it that it's just, you kind of flow through it all and there's no challenge to it in a good way.
That's one of Jeff Lemire's gifts. Like even when you're reading the most bummed out, depressing thing in the world, it's a page turner somehow. Like Underwater Welder is not a happy comic, but I couldn't stop turning the page. It was like I was reading a Stephen King book or something. Just like, okay.
I think what's so weird about him writing page turners is that his stories are kind of a dull roar, many of them, and it's very different than Hickman and the way Dragata writes, and that they're all each story beat is so loud. And when I read this, it's really like putting on like a real vibey album as opposed to one that's going to pump you up, and I think that's great. I don't know, it's got its spot for sure.
And I think the common element there with Stephen King's a good apt analogy, and this, and like listening to that style of music, it's the groundedness. It's that it's while it is surrealist fantasy, it's not fantastical. It's all of the art techniques we're talking about that make it feel grimy and worn and indistinct make it feel more grounded and real on a weird perspective level. So
it felt a little bit more real until the Infinity Gauntlet came into play.
Right, and then that's where it like really jarringly takes you out of that, and that's so effective as a tool as well.
Yeah,
But even that, it's presented in a way that we're seeing panels, which is the way we're used to interacting with these people. So as weird and horrible as it would be to be torn apart like that, and to be able to see yourself from all these different angles and perspectives and timelines, it's the way we're used to seeing them. So it's not
in a weird way, it's extra grounding because it reminds you that you're reading a comic book. It reminds you of reality in the middle of your escapism.
It's breaking the thing that it's inside of, and it means more in this. It means as much in this as it means to watch Spider-Man hugging Tony Stark and floating away. Like, it's just, I love that it's breaking it.
I used to climb like a 20-foot tall ladder to hang things from the ceiling at MerchBot, and I would get up there and I would be on the second to last rung, and like it was terrifying, and I would get a little bit wobbly, but there were strings hanging down from the ceiling, and if I could put my hand on one of those strings, they wouldn't hold me, but it would give me the balance that I needed to stand up there confidently. And I felt totally safe, even if I was just touching this completely useless bit of thing that would ground me. And that's kind of how I feel about this. Like, the Mobius strips in Gideon Falls are very different than the Mobius strips in Prometheus.
Infinity Gauntlet, or in Prometheus.
Because there are these things that keep you, like, you can feel your feet on the ground in this in a different way.
Would you guys call this book accessible?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, the coworker I was talking about, Alex, he doesn't read like a huge number of comic books. I mean, more than some people do. But like he's read more than just like Watchmen and a few other a few things, but he doesn't read a lot of comic books. And like he just loved it. So
well, it's all downhill from here, Alex. Sorry, dude.
Everything's relative.
People I know for horror fans and like wanting to share it with them for the horror angle, like regardless of the medium, I think anybody could like connect with.
Yeah.
It's not like the medium would not be a barrier even if you were into comics.
I found myself, this has become one of my go-to recommendations whenever I'm chatting with somebody, because I love it. And Django, thankfully recommended it to me one of the days I was in the shop and picked it up on a whim. But I'm just kind of curious if I was hoisting, putting on somebody else something that was inaccessible or too out there.
I think it's one of our highest subscribed image books at the store. I would say it's probably top 10 for a genre that is, while predominantly science fiction, it has a lot of all types of things in it. But we sell a lot of this book, and people that read it generally get on board for a long time. And it's people who gravitate to all sorts of different types of fiction. Like, there is, I think, a primordially accessible thing about it.
Like we were saying earlier too, with it being like the story sticking in your mind, and then coming back to view the art in a different lens. I think that really helps with accessibility and rereadability, because you remember the vague plot points, and so when you're coming back through, you're like, oh, I see, and you can pick out, like Will was saying, you can see some of those little Easter eggs that, and Django even was mentioning, that are hinting the futures of what's going to be happening. And I think that's really awesome that a comic can do that, and still, like, that is an amazing way. I mean, there were definitely books when I was a kid that when the next one would come out, I would reread the entire series, either because I forgot it or I just liked it a lot. And this is that kind of series where every time I reread it when the next volume comes out, all of it, and it's every bit as joyful as the first time, if not more.
You just had a thought for me, which is that, like, Watchmen, you can say it's fantastic, and it is fantastic. But I think a lot of the incredible beauty of that book comes from having some basic awareness for comics, like the 9-panel grid or a lot of comic structure. And a total novice within comic books can look at this and be like, whoa, I've never seen something like that. Whereas a total expert who's, lived with comics forever will have that same response. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some part of that accessibility is that it puts novices and experts on the same playing field, because you don't have to know a ton to know that's crazy. That dude just walked out of that panel and fell into a different one. I've never seen something like that.
Yeah, I'd be curious to talk to somebody who, like, this was one of their first 10 comics and then talk to them 2 years later.
Will? Is that a first
I don't think
10
it was
for
in
you?
my. I don't think it was in my first 10, but it was
Definitely my
image,
first. It was
though.
my first image. It might have been like up to 15, but I mean, it was pretty much like Guardians for me, Moon Knight, and then it was this. It was pretty quick because of Lemire's run on Moon Knight. I loved it. I loved Lemire's run on Moon Knight.
It was probably my second image after maybe reading a volume or two of Sex Criminals. So I mean, same thing, you know.
Yeah, they're like the same book.
I mean, like, I think Sex Criminals might have been my first image book. So
Good book.
I think Sex Criminals was my first.
It's just so easy to jump over to that from Hawkeye.
On my grid, it's us two at the top, and then all of these new sounding. I'm feeling old, and I'm wondering if
I just have to say,
just on a comics level.
Have you read Sex Criminals, Mike?
I read. That's one of the ones I read in the library. I've read at least the first trade of that.
And you've certainly read a lot
either
of
over or almost
their
over.
work.
There's like 1 or 2 more issues left, I think.
It's definitely one I kept meaning to pick back up on. I enjoyed reading it a lot. Just not one that I had the urge to put on my pool list.
That's one that I always wait for the hardcovers. The big
hard covers.
The big hardcovers.
The big hardcovers. Okay, everybody. So 9:07 here. I do want to say thank you for everyone for skipping a week with us last week. That was super cool. I was out of town. Django and I
beat down.
Mondays are not the easiest days for us to get to do this, and we love doing it. I am curious. Is there I'm feelers out on the ground? Is there another day that works for people if it were to change?
What's the easiest day, and then we'll tell you whether it works or not.
Well, does Sunday work? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at the comic shop is like a brick 3-day shift that kind of doesn't end.
And we're looking to make it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as just a larger brick. The fewer night activities on that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday thing breaks it up a lot easier. I love doing this, and we'll keep doing it on Monday if that's the best day. But I am curious. We did sort of we all ended up here on a Monday for the first session and have kept with it. Are there bad days? Are there good days for folks? Is Sunday a no good?
Sunday's less good for me. But
okay.
The other thing is because this was like the first social thing that I started doing once the lockdown started happening. I've kind of structured everything around this on a Monday. So it's
and I don't want to change that for everybody for sure.
A little bit the same for me. Kind of any night doing this, my wife always gives me a side eye because that means she has to deal with the kids by herself for an hour and change.
Oh, well, we'll do a book club for her on another day.
For sure.
Sounds good. I think she's reading the Handmaid's Tale sequel book is right now.
Nice.
Illustrated?
I don't think it's illustrated.
He did do the Handmaid's Tale illustrated, but not the
I mean, I'm sure I can figure a way, but I think weekends are more challenging because those are the days where we're both not working, and it gives us more uninterrupted family time as opposed to maybe squeezing it on a weeknight. But if we had to do it on a weekend, I'm sure we'd find a way.
I think
Mondays if we had
can
to go
keep...
to like every other week or anything like that to make life easier for you guys.
I think the worst case scenario is that maybe there would be more instances of either Django or I being around, and I'm sure everyone is totally fine with that. But yeah, some Mondays. I tell you what, everybody, some Mondays.
Okay, Garfield.
I mean,
I felt like Garfield last week. I was like, man, Mondays suck, and then I was like, wait a minute. I love lasagna too.
The Mondays are probably the most likely days for either Django or I to have to console the other for having an emotional breakdown while in the store, and then bounce back and read a book by 8:00. So,
I think the real Garfield test, Garfield test, is: are you actually more funny if you don't say anything?
Me? Absolutely not.
Django's always funny. Well, let's plan on next Monday getting this East of West volume 8. 8?
Yeah.
When that finally puts you firmly in the camp of experiencing a volume for the first time
Yep.
with us, right?
I've read 0% of volume 8.
Okay.
I think I read volume 8 actually. According to Goodreads, I did, but I don't remember it. So that'll be cool.
According to Goodreads, I
Hashtag
liked
Goodreads.
it. All right, everybody. Well, you're all amazing. Thank you for reading this with us. Will, again, thank you for the big push to have us start at this. I am loving reading this book, and I'm sorry to anyone who has a volume 4 that has a silent issue, and we'll correct the problem soon as they come out.
I'm fine. It's Andrew who is upset about it.
I just want to read it. I'm just sad.
Yeah.
Poor
Yeah.
Image.
I know. I'm surprised they haven't gotten the corrected ones to us. It's been almost a month, I think.
I mean,
I feel like we're
coronavirus,
supposed to have
man.
them real soon.
Okay.
Um,
You know Jeff
Have
Stang.
you looked for a tiny envelope in the mail that's just full of word balloons?
Word balloons?
Yeah, you just paste them on there.
You get to put them in your own
You had to
order.
create your own story.
Yeah.
I love it.
Oh no, they're numbered in order. Put numbers on the back.
All right, everyone. Well, we will see you all soon. Django, I'll see you even sooner because we got to record last week's podcast somehow, some point at some time before we record next week's podcast at some point, somehow, sometime.
Yeah, double the giant sized podcast, X-Men.
Just do one big podcast. We'll listen to. It doesn't matter. We'll listen to back to back anyway. Just do one big long podcast.
Yeah. Leave
Can
out
we
the
do our next
editing.
podcast
Leave
at
out
the same
the
time?
editing. We're
Okay.
still in
Same time when
quarantine.
one of
Leave
you
out the
saying
editing.
something.
Mike's got a real Gideon Falls vibe to it. I like that. We'll have some simultaneity metaphors going in there.
I
All
want
right,
to do it
everybody.
all in whispers.
Oh, ASMR cast. All right, everyone. We'll see you all next week.
See you
Thanks for
guys.
joining
Have a
us.
good one.
Farewell.
Bye,
Bye.